Hello and welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group podcast. I'm Jacie,
And I'm Barbara.
and today, very exciting, we have Bill Weber, IEP to the stars, as I always introduce the IEPs,
He's
with
in
us.
California, so that might be more accurate in
Actually,
this
yeah, and he was
situation.
telling us about projects he's doing in Park City, definitely to the stars.
Yeah.
But he was generous enough to give us some time to ask him some questions about the testing methods that we use for CIRS patients and which kind of testing methods he recommends and how to interpret the results. As always, before we jump in, this is not medical advice, this is not remediation advice. We cannot recommend hiring an IEP enough.
Please do
They're
it.
they're expensive. However, way less expensive than not doing it right.
Yes. Like
What
thousands of dollars. Thousands. They save more than they cost, generally
100%.
speaking, because you wouldn't DIY your way to health from CIRS. You have a practitioner, someone who's experienced, who knows what they're doing to help lead you through that. Same thing goes with remediating your house. If you do want to stay in the home that you're in, but you know there's an issue and that you're not getting better, an indoor environmental professional is the right way to go. You want to get that help. A CIRS literate one, a medically respectful one. Is that the word? One that cares. And Bill Weber is one that cares.
He sure is. So, jumping right into his bio, Bill Weber is a senior consultant with Avalar and a board certified indoor environmental consultant specializing in building science and biotoxin related environments. With over 2 decades of experience in remediation, investigation, and repair, he is recognized nationally for his expertise in mold, moisture, and indoor air quality. Bill has contributed to key industry standards and publications, including the Surviving Mold Remediation Consensus document and Prescriptions for a Healthy Home. That's on our must-read list. We recently did a book Rex episode. If you didn't see that, definitely go back, listen to that one. But Bill, he's passionate about bridging the gap between building science and human health to create safer, healthier indoor spaces. And he has the biggest heart for this.
Yeah.
I can't imagine like dealing with mold all day and then like mold and like I was gonna say warm fuzzies aren't related, but
Oh no, they
I'm gonna
kind of
stop.
are.
Let's just jump
Okay.
into the interview.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you again so much, Bill, for being here. We love all the IEPs. You guys are like the superheroes of the CIRS space, doing so much great work and helping people get safe environments. So thank you again for being here and
Yeah,
sharing your
thank
knowledge.
thank you very, very much. I love your podcast and just really appreciate you getting good information out there for people to really help them heal and give them a knowledge base where even if they don't have a medically important assessor that they're working with, that they can challenge the IEP that they do have.
Yeah. Yep. Perfect. Well, let's dig right on into the questions. The first one
Okay.
is kind of let's start a good foundation or basics here. When you're assessing an environment for a CIRS patient, what testing method do you consider most important? Or does it, I'm sure it's a case by case thing, but what are your go-to testing methods?
Sure. When I first talk with any client or my staff talks with any patient client, we really want to understand what is the question that we're trying to answer. So for some, it has, and for many of them, it has to do with, is there mold in my home? I have a doctor. They are telling me that mold might be my trigger for my symptoms. And how do I find out if I have a mold problem or not? For that, it is, I don't want to say simple, but it's more straightforward, where we're just trying to determine what the fungal ecology is. The fungal ecology is really what's in the environment and how much of it is there. So if we're trying to find that out, there's two types of analyses that I like to go to. One, they're both collection of dust within the home and outside the home and in the attic of the home and in the crawl space if there is one, because the home is the environment that it's in, meaning the outside conditions, as well as how air flows from one part of the house to another. There are no rooms that are hermetically sealed. So air and particulate will flow from the attic down, from the crawl space up, and it'll mix it up. So that's why it's so important to measure what is going on in each one of these locations. Plus, when you do that, now you have an idea of what the epicenter is, or where, if it is elevated, where is it most elevated so that we can maybe even work on looking at that area. So these two types of analysis is one is the ERMI. And we really like the ERMI because there's just so much data to pull from in terms of what's normal or what can be expected in a reference home versus a water damaged home. We have a good array of different mold species. So there are mold species that tell us if the environment is a long-term chronic water damage indicator, water damage environment, or if there's probably some condensation issues, or even if there's rot somewhere in the property, we can find that out just from the ERMI. The other one is a culturable analysis. I spoke to this at the last conference about culturing the dust. And what's really cool about that is the ERMI only seeks out the DNA of 36 different mold species. There are over 25,000 known and researched mold species on our planet. And there's probably millions, but we only have about 25,000. So 36 is a very small subset. In fact, the ERMI study started out with a lot more that species that they were finding, but it had to be narrowed down for one, the cost of running that sample, but of course these were the most, I guess, available, if you will, and an assortment of different types. So what the culturable does is it helps us identify viable mold species that are in that environment. And what does that mean? It usually means that these molds are either active or they were recently active, or the conditions were met so that they can grow in a petri dish, in an agar plate. And the second thing is that it provides information on species that aren't on the ERMI. So there are many different penicillium species, aspergillus species, species that I had never ever seen before can still come up on these agar plates where now I have to do some research to find out why is this particular mold type in the house. And so these are really two amazing ways to analyze the dust in the home to determine what does that fungal ecology look like.
Yeah, we loved your talk at CIRS-X. Well, we always love your talks at CIRS-X, but we did cover that in a previous podcast episode when we recapped the whole conference. And I guess for the culturing, I know one of the, I guess, drawbacks of it is it does take time, take several weeks, in fact. So what might rule out using a culture would probably be, a renter trying to find a unit that's safe for
Yes.
them to live in, right? Because very few landlords are going to hold on to a unit for weeks or a full month while you wait for those results. So in those situations, I imagine the ERMI is a better bet. But are there other situations where you might go one over the other, or you always want to do both if you can?
Yeah, so I have gotten calls from patient clients who either expect to be in surgery or have surgery, and the surgeon wants to make sure that there aren't any pathogenic mold types that are in the home. So pathogenic means that it can grow in your body and cause infection.
Wow.
So on the ERMI, for instance, the first four that are on the ERMI, which are Aspergillus flavus, Aspergillus fumigatus, Aspergillus ocratius, and Aspergillus niger are all pathogenic molds. And so if we were to find those on a viable mold test, then we would be concerned because the patient client who is getting out of surgery has a higher risk at home for infection from those mold types because those are the ones that grow in the body. Others would be a newer home. A client moves into a home that was just recently built. We might get more information from a culturable mold sample because everything's so new in that house that we might get a little bit more accurate information. We definitely want to have that in addition to the ERMI, but at least have the culturable in a house that's 6, 9 months, even up to a year would be very, very favorable for that.
Wow, I had
Um,
no idea about the pathogenic mold. And like, I kind of want to bring you back just to read us the different mold names. Because every time they come up, we're just like, oh man, staring on the barrel of a gun at that one.
we just press a button and it's Bill's voice just filling in the name for
Yeah.
us when it comes up.
Aspergillus niger.
Yeah, so really simply on the ERMI, it's the first four mold types that are on the report. And they're usually on the reports that I've seen, they're highlighted a lot of times in different color, but it's Aspergillus flavus, Aspergillus fumigatus, Aspergillus niger, and Aspergillus ochraceus.
Oh, gracious.
Lucretius sounds cool.
I
Like that
know. Like
one.
a
That's your
Roman
drag
name
name. Yeah.
or a drag name.
Yeah.
So
Either
then
one.
get this. Here's a pro tip for everyone out is that in the event that you see on your ERMI that there's all four of those that are represented, all four of them are on there on the ERMI, it is more likely than not that the mold that is in the home is in a either a warm wall or an attic.
Ooh.
Okay, so pathogenic means that they are thermophilic. They prefer warmer temperatures. They are more likely to grow in a warmer environment. So south facing, west facing walls and attics are going to be the place that I would generally look first for
Wow.
those mold types, especially if all four are represented on the ERMI sample.
I feel like every time I am lucky enough to have a conversation with an IEP like you, Bill, I learn one more little piece like that. And you guys have like thousands of little data points in your head, I'm sure, just based on your years
Yeah.
of experience and everything you've seen, where if this, then that. And I just want to reiterate, we always say this whenever we, interview an IEP on our podcast, hire an IEP for your situation because of this. Because there's going to be so many other situations where your report is saying some little thing that might not stand out to you because what do you know? What do I know? That's how I feel. But if Bill was looking at your report, it would give him some indicator like that to help you basically Columbo your way to the actual source, detective your way in. And that's always really impressive to me. So I just want to point that out and again reiterate how important it is to have your own IEP to ha help you handle your own situation.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. In your specific area as well, across the country, the different IEPs should have a better idea of what the climate, right? The climate and what molds in that particular client or in that climate are most, I guess, fruitful or apparent. When I have a project currently in Kentucky, and that microclimate that is in Kentucky, that hot and humid, believe it or not, climate in Kentucky provides different information than out here in California where I am. And so, and different building techniques and different living conditions. So it's really important that you have an IEP who's familiar with that climate zone as well, because we really need to know how that building is supposed to operate. Maybe that building wasn't designed well or properly, or maybe that contractor was an out-of-state contractor, especially when we talk about custom homes. You know, Barbara, when in Hawaii, when I get a project in Hawaii, which I have about six right now that I'm working on, inevitably it is an architect or a contractor from the mainland who has built a home in Hawaii that doesn't suit that environment. And then problems ensue from there. And so the knowing how the building is supposed to be built in the climate that it is in is really important for an IEP to understand as well.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
know
that
that
makes
was a little bit off topic from what testing methods,
no,
but
it's
it
great.
was kind of rolling right into that.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. I mean, and I guess it does kind of roll into what I introduce as well. Like, how much can patients realistically interpret their own results? I know this is like a tricky question, so please feel free to go on as many tangents as you need to answer it, but I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I would say that it is really difficult to interpret that that data. And like a lot of the defense experts on the other side will point out that the EPA does not recommend an ERMI for environmental sampling. But the reason why they don't like the ERMI, that the government is not pushing or accepting that ERMI is because the interpretation of it. It's not because it's an invalid way to test, it is the interpretation of the data and the fact that one ERMI, which I hope I've made clear in every single presentation, one ERMI does not provide enough information to make good decisions. Where the ERMI is collected, how the ERMI is collected, all of those are so important. And even if I have a virtual client, we like to FaceTime as they collect their sample before they send it to us because we want to ensure that it's an accurate sample. Because if I'm going to provide information, I need accurate data to do that. And so if a client, for instance, collects dust off of a filter on their HVAC system, is that really what the whole house looks like? And how long has that filter been in there? And what room is the supply the I'm sorry, the return register in? And what's going on with the HVAC unit? Like there's so many questions that come up in a conversation about where that was collected from. I had another client who had a lot of houseplants and they collected dust around every houseplant. And so the sample looked like it was from the outside. And I said, is this from do you have an atrium in your house? And they said no. And I said, did you have the windows open in the areas, for a long period of time? No. And I said, I'm seeing a lot of mold types that are should be represented more outside than inside. And they said, well, we do have some house plants. And I said, so tell me about that. And they said, well, we have about 30 house plants in our family room, and I collected dust around the house plants. Was I not supposed to do that? But if I didn't know how to interpret that, I would have I would have come out to a conclusion that was not accurate or true. It was true for that little area, but it didn't represent a problem. It represented that fungal ecology with 30 plants in the family room.
Right.
So when the when the ERMI is collected in the way that nets good information and there's more of them, so we can compare complaint areas with non-complaint areas, with the attic, with the crawl space, and mostly outside. Now we have a much better picture of what's going on. And so I like to say that that first ERMI test, when I get the call and they say, my doctor said to collect an ERMI, and now I don't know what it means. Can you help what it means? It ends up being a litmus test
Sure. Yeah.
for the most part.
And I would say, for a lot of CIRS patients that are just getting started, doing your own test is still smart to get that first like sense of what, how your house is and what, how bad it is potentially.
Mhm.
But I don't know, is it maybe a money saving, a money and time saving method to contact an IEP first and maybe get coached on how to do the testing? Is that maybe a better way for people to go if they have the opportunity?
If they have the opportunity, absolutely take it. And, I know that we've been talking about mold and ERMI and culturable. We haven't addressed bacteria in this conversation, so I want to make sure I don't leave that out. I do test mainly for mold in the very beginning because mold is often a surrogate for bacteria anyway, because the bacteria usually grow where, the actinomycetes will grow where mold is growing. And so if we know that there's mold, we can pretty much guarantee there's going to be some actinomycetes. I don't know about the human habitat one, so that would be a separate type of test. And endotoxin is a separate test that I would be interested in as well. Mold is usually a condition that is more ubiquitous right? When there's a problem, it's going to be usually more a mold problem than any bacteria. But let's say we take those samples and the mold doesn't look so bad, but the inflammation is still there. Then I would move to endotoxin and or actino after that. So, Bill, why wouldn't we do all of them at one time? Because we need a lot of dust in order to do all of that. In fact, just doing the ERMI and the culturable, we need what we'd love to have is about 30 to 50 milligrams of dust. And how much is that? Well, if you had a Swiffer wipe, it's really a darkened Swiffer wipe from edge to edge to get enough dust for those two. To do the Actinomycetes and the endotoxin is about the same amount. And very rarely do we see a patient client who has that much dust hanging
Right.
around. And so what I have to do, what I've had to do is weigh out what is most important for this particular client and what they're going through. If they said, Barbara, if they said they had a sewage loss, then I'm going to go for endotoxin primarily first, or there was a sewer smell. Those are the things that an IEP needs to ask before we decide what's test is going to be best for this house. Sometimes I focus on swabbing too, just using swabs to indicate where where we think it might be coming from. Maybe there's a patient client that has had some sort of water damage occur inside the house. They had it remediated. They really don't know if the remediation was successful or not. Well, we can use swabs like micrometer swabs or pathways swabs in those areas to see if that remediation contractor who was out there a year, 2 years, 7 years ago did a good job or not. And that's not something that necessarily the ERMI or the culture bowl will pick up.
Interesting. Yeah. I know it's so funny about the dust issue because I know Jacie is experiencing this currently herself. She just moved and she's waited months now to collect enough dust and she just
Mm.
keeps waiting. Do you have some tips and tricks for people? We've heard about, the trash bags on the wall and on the
Yes.
desks and all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff, but do you have any tips for the viewers on collecting dust? Enough dust.
So yes, the plastic actually does work. I mean, you can use sheet plastic too. The benefit about plastic is that it comes with static electricity.
Hmm.
So it's able to pull stuff out of the air that's just floating in the air before it lands on the floor. The terrible part about that is that yes, it just takes a lot of time. A pro tip for collecting dust quickly is remediation contractors use what's called a negative air machine, right? So it pulls air from interstitial spaces and it exhausts it to the outside. That's how a negative air machine works. And what we've done in the past in order to accelerate that time, it takes about 2 weeks to collect enough dust by doing it this manner, which is there is a negative air machine that's used and I put Swiffer wipes on the intake. I put 4 Swiffer wipes on the big intake of that negative air machine, and I draw air through that negative air machine over a period of 2 weeks. Then I take those four and I send it off to the lab. And so essentially what we're doing is we're checking the entire house, right? Because the negative air machine is pulling from all these interstitial spaces in wall cavities. It's from the crawl space or the basement. And and we can do that with several negative air machines placed throughout the house, depending on how big the house is. But that's a secret pro tip, so to speak, of how
Yeah.
to understand what that fungal ecology is like, in accelerated form.
No, I felt that was so validating, like the frustration of having enough dust to collect.
Yeah.
Also, that you go for the mold first. Because when I was explaining to people when I was moving that I was just doing the Hurts Me Too as kind of like a pass fail. And then once I moved in, I was going to do the ERMI actinos and endos. I explained it because I was like, if there's a mold issue in the place that I'm moving to, because I'm renting, I'm not going to want to remediate. But with bacteria and sewage stuff, like there's more levers there. It seems like there's more opportunity for fixing it that isn't like a total remediation. Would you say that's a fair? fair take.
Like everything else, it depends.
Yeah.
It truly, yeah, it truly depends. With actinos, it's a little bit tricky because we're still in the middle of research. All of us are still learning about actinos and where they come from, what effect do they have on the body, and and whether they're from human habitat or what's called soil habitat, right? That something related to the maybe the mold growth. The endotoxins, believe it or not, I find a lot of the source being outside for endotoxin. Here in California, we have the Central Valley that is heavy for livestock and agriculture, and most of most of the clients that are out in that Central Valley are subject to more endotoxins than anywhere else in the States because of the livestock. And livestock poop and the air picks it up and it travels down south through that valley. And unfortunately, we see amounts that are really, really high.
Yeah, that's a rough. My mom's whole side of the family lives there, and it's
Okay.
always rough. I don't visit as often anymore because I don't feel good when I come home,
Mm.
which sucks. Sucks because they've all lived there their whole lives. Yeah, it's a rough spot
Would you
for
say
sure.
it stinks instead of
Womp womp. Yes, a little bit, a little bit. Um,
Yes.
yeah. Well, I know the my next question's like it's we can get into the nuance here on this one, but I am curious what are some common gray area situations where test results aren't clearly safe or unsafe? And how do you help clients navigate those situations?
Yeah, the short answer is all of them.
Yep.
They're all gray area situations, and I'll tell you that interpretation of the data is not cannot be done in a vacuum. We really need to know as much as IEPs. We really need to know as much information as possible. The most difficult projects are those that are older homes, and older homes means i- if you haven't lived in the home your entire life then it's an older home because you really don't know the history of it. And you can't rely on the previous person who you bought the house from or who you rented or who was the renter before you to give you accurate information. But the IEPs need as much information as possible, and doing virtual consultations are difficult because very few homeowners are willing to go to a crawl space or go into their attic. And these are two areas that are just areas that nobody really wants to go. Nobody goes, and oftentimes are the those are the problem areas because you never see them. I Barbara, so many I'll go in and I'll see that there's a puddle under plumbing. And then I go down with the walkie-talkie and I leave one with the owner if unless I have my assistant with me. And I'll say, hey, I'm under the master shower right now. Run the master shower for me. And then down below I'll be drip, drip, or I have been in homes where the plumbing was never even hooked up. Like there is an open drain. Like the plumber came, forgot that he needed the part, and never came back, kind of thing. So crawl spaces, super important.
Yeah.
And I know I'm getting off this whole gray area situation, but
No, no, these are great examples.
the fact is that they're all gray areas until they're not, right? It is understanding the construction of the building, the materials that were used, the history of the building, whether the building was built correctly, and often in custom homes that we see that the mold was as a result of either a design failure, a construction failure, or both. And then it's having the right samples, the right data in order to put all this together. And so, unfortunately for your listeners today, it costs a lot for that, right? To do that many samples of it is just costly in and of itself. And then to have an IEP who's knows buildings and who's going in the crawl space in the attic, that's going to be expensive too. But ultimately, we're hoping that we're going to save time, money, and energy in order to give you the right diagnosis, right? So it's like, are you going to go to a CIRS certified doctor, or are you going to go to a podiatrist to find out what's going inside your body. The podiatrist is going to look at your feet and tell you all about that, but they're not going to be taking all the tests and the genie and and all of that the CIRS practitioner will. So the IP is not much different.
Yeah.
The more robust person that you have, the more complete the answers will be. And maybe they're not answers that that your listeners would like to have, but you'd rather have accurate information to make good decisions on because maybe that house isn't for you. Maybe it's just too overwhelming of a task. But maybe it's the house that you grew up in. It's all paid for and you're willing to put that in because you have the dentist that you love that's not too far away. You know everyone at the grocery store. You know your mailman. You give them presents every year, and people that's part of having a home too. Not just a house, but a home is the environment. Your neighborhood, the people that surround you surround yourself with. That all goes into that decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that everyone has to decide for themselves with, of course, the help of the professionals they hire, like the IEP, like their doctor. It's a vulnerable position to be in to have to kind of rely on experts and what their interpretation of things is, but it really is the best way forward, especially in these situations. And I'll do a plug now for the program you were involved with for CIRS-X, the medically important remediation course, right? That is something I know you guys are working hard to get this kind of level of care and education and knowledge of medically important remediation to
Yes.
more remediators, to more boots on the ground, however you want to refer to it, to get more professionals out there available locally to people to help them get their home in the right shape or to at least assess their home in a good way to the point where they can make that decision to leave or to remediate. So
Yeah,
thank
and
you for
and
that.
and Michael Schwantz and I we did the medically important assessment course too, which
Yes, that's
is
right.
chock full of really good information for the assessors and the remediators too. And we really, obviously we saw a huge need for this. And and we have homeowners across the country who are taking it too to just police the remediation contractor and say, hey, that machine's not supposed to be hooked up like that. And then the
Yeah.
remediation contractor says, what do you mean, Mrs. Williams? And they said, well, I took a course, an advanced course in this, and it's not aligned with what they're saying. And maybe, hold the remediation contractor maybe accountable to take that course as well, and to help them
Yeah.
and help them. I just recently had a couple projects just outside of Salt Lake City, and I didn't have a really good remediation contractor out there that I could refer. And I found through a client, I found one, and he took the course. He cares, right? Because that's really the foundation of what we do is you have to be able to care for people
Yeah.
if you want to be in this arena and he is taking off with it. He's my go-to for Salt Lake City and the surrounding area now because he just took to it. He understands it. We've had two successful projects together, and he's just moving forward saying, "This has completely changed my life."
That's cool though. Yeah, and that we need more stories like that. You can work on Las Vegas next if you want to. I'm just kidding though. But yeah, we do if we have like that star player, in each major area or at least like a couple in each state would be fantastic. I know we're all doing our best. I would love to get more people, in more professionals, both practitioners and the IEPs and the remediators and everyone in between to help out and help the patients because the more there are, the better. That's for
Yes.
sure.
So, if someone does decide that they're remediating or moving, there's the mountain of possessions that they have in their home. And do you have any words of wisdom for us there in terms of taking care of those house contents?
Yeah, so the personal property items that are in the house can be very challenging in terms of making recommendations. A lot of it has to do with what kind of environment were they in? So when we collect dust from a room, we can assume that that dust is going to be the same on the sofa or the dining room chair cushions, the pillows in the bedroom, to a lesser extent, mattresses, believe it or not, because I think mattresses have so many layers of protection that they don't get hit like a couch does. But with contents, I am a proponent of everything can be cleaned. With enough time and energy, everything can be cleaned over and over as long as it's taken out of the environment that is the contaminated environment. Whether it's cost effective or not is another question. If it if the material has actual growth on it, you know, like the white spots or something like that, I'm more prone to saying, you know what, we probably want to throw that away if there's physical growth. But if it's a sentimental item, then we can invest in cleaning that. It just has to be cleaned thoroughly and time again. And contents can be tested just like just like a carpet can, and we can do that with a vacuum pump and collect the dust from that item, send it in, and we can have analysis done. The bad part about it is that we don't have data that says if that number is X, then you need to throw it away. What I divide it into, I think this is a low risk item, a medium risk, or a high risk item.
Mm.
And then that can swing just by the sensitivity of the client as well, right?
I
If
almost
that
see that as
client,
being like a grid because you could have low, medium, high, and then like easy or difficult to clean. And then it's like if it's high risk, difficult to clean, maybe that's the area that you recommend people don't keep.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, well, I recommend that they don't keep it? I think I recommend that they think hard about whether they want to keep it or not. You know, I don't know if you've ever heard of the avocado bed. You know, there's mattresses that are $8,000. Like I'm not going to tell someone to necessarily throw that away unless I really believe that it's been severely impacted.
Mm.
Right? There are items that are extremely expensive. There are collectible items, right? That one of a kind items, books. Michael Schranz and I, we did a project together in the convent. That we spoke about that
Yeah.
in one of the conferences. And we went to the library where there were books that were, what, 300 years old? And
Wow.
they had mold growth on them. I'm definitely not going to tell the sisters that they have to dispose of that book, right? Because that it's a religious document that means a lot to their Catholic faith, right? So there are workarounds for those types of issues. Again, the IEP, the indoor environmental professional, is going to be key in helping them with that. And if that IEP doesn't have the answers, there's a good network of CIRS IEPs, and we get together often to talk about situations like this so we can all learn from each other. And so I would say that although contents can be really, really challenging, we would gauge it based upon the environment that we've done the testing, the dust collection analysis to start off with. Once they are cleaned, so let's say that you send out your property for professional cleaning, we can judge the performance of that cleaning through testing of those items too. Of course, you know, an ERMI test is still over $200. So the piece would have to be worth it. But testing the couch will give us an indication of how the chairs are and how the painting is and how the other items in that room probably are, or give us a sense of what they are. So one item can answer questions about a lot of different items. Yeah. Pro
Well,
tip time.
yeah, lots of tips all throughout. Thank you very much, Phil. Was there, if the listener is interested in working with you, I don't know how many clients you're taking on. I know a lot of the IEPs are very busy, have a long wait list, all kinds of stuff. But do you work virtually with patients, or do you focus on commercial situations more?
I am a hands-on guy. We do offer virtual up to a point, right? Where I can say with everything that you've provided me and everything that you were able to do either FaceTime or whatever, I think that we have a pretty good handle on this. But if you want something that is more certain, you really need to have a boots on the ground idea of what's going on. Me and my staff, I do have three staff that work under me, and we do a lot of work. I'm more the traveling person, and I'm the litigation expert. So if there is a potentially a problem with a contractor who didn't do their job right, or a remediation contractor that didn't do their job right, or an insurance company that fell short of doing the right thing, I usually get involved with those.
Yeah.
So the best way to reach me would be via email.
Mhm.
And my email address is my first initial B, last name Weber, Weber, at ravalar.com. That's RAV like victory, ELAR.com.
Thank you for that, and we'll make sure it's in the show notes as well. And was there anything else that you wanted to leave our audience with before we wrap?
Just a big kiss. And I, I would expect that many of your listeners are listening because they are in some, I want to say pain, but some sort of distress,
Sure.
right? And I just want to say, I'm sorry that you're going through this and that there is hope. And with the right information and the right people to help you, you can get through this. We can get through it together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you for being here. And of course, for more information and support, you can join us over at the cirsgroup.com.
We'll see you there.